My blood, my body, I give to you, Satan.
Witchcraft is with us today, and now the bizarre truth is exposed in Witchcraft 70. Hidden cameras probe today's unspeakable cults to document erotic rituals. Witchcraft 70. See human sacrifice on the altar of Baal. See sensual ecstasies of hippie families, and much more in Witchcraft 70, rated X.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're gonna kiss me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, Doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that hurts!
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Welcome to another episode of the American International Podcast. I'm Jeff Markin.
I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And the film we're covering in this week's episode promises shocking rituals, forbidden ceremonies, and an in-depth look into modern witchcraft. But what we got is 1970's Witchcraft 70.
Witchcraft 70 was directed by Luigi Scattini and Lee Frost, written by Alberto Bevilacqua and Luigi Scattini, and produced by P.A.C. Caravel and released by Trans-American Pictures.
Witchcraft 70 features narration by Edmund Purdom in the U.S. version.
And no stars. It's a documentary.
So I guess we'll get right to what appears in this documentary.
Our narrator tells us that we are about to explore the nature of witchcraft in the modern age. He continues that cameras were sometimes, but not always, permitted to record these sacred and unspeakable rites. And then the credits roll. And may I just say that our print looks terrible.
Yeah, we found an original Trans-American release print somewhere, and it's not the best quality. The Italian version is available streaming currently on Amazon Prime, and it looks a lot better, but it's not the cut we want. It's got different footage, and it's in Italian. But there is subtitles, if you're into that sort of thing. Or even if you're not, they're still there. The credits are presented over kind of an abstract...
montage?
Yeah.
Collage, maybe?
Yeah, it kind of looks like the opening to Ultraman with the paint swirling around, and then we get...
There's a bunch of faces and screaming.
And it's pretty abstract, but I guess it evokes witchcraft.
And the music is really jarring, too. So that's supposed to get you out of your comfort zone, I guess. We open with a candle that looks like an Oscar, and it's aflame, as our narrator asks us if we are a witch, but he doesn't give us a chance to answer.
He does say it's an absurd question.
And then he jumps into a history lesson about the early days of witchcraft, as told by him.
He starts in the Middle Ages, how people would even endanger themselves by the risk of death by fire in order to practice the black arts. And he continues that even in America, only a few short years ago, we were burning witches in Salem.
Were we, though?
I understand that that was not really happening.
Yeah, urban legend, maybe, or not so much urban, but legend anyway.
But then he goes on to tell us that there are witches in today's society and that they and their covens practice and believe in witchcraft and Satan in much the same manner as Christians practice Christianity today.
And then he tells us that this documentary is not going to try to convince you that witches are real.
Or to disprove the evils or effectiveness of witchcraft. But it does go on throughout the entire thing to say that they're doing evil things. So I don't know how true that statement is.
But he sums it up by saying, that is for you to decide.
After presenting a pretty one-sided argument throughout the film, as we'll see.
And then we get our single expert on the topic, a Lieutenant David Esty from Capitola, California, which he informs us is the oldest seaside town on the Pacific Ocean and 75 miles south of San Francisco.
We're also told that he's a very respected officer.
So you can take everything he says as the absolute truth, because police never lie.
Capitola has a population of 4,000, but it goes to 12,000 during the summer months.
All thanks to hippies, apparently.
And Lieutenant Estes tells us that these hippies seem to have drug problems. And everything that's wrong with culture today stems from that.
From hippies, not just from the drugs, but they sort of go hand in hand in this. And then the interviewer starts shouting questions at him, one of them about finding dead animals around town, some of them having been skinned. Lieutenant Esty confesses that, yes, they found a few, but they can't directly link it to a satanic cult of any kind. But he does go on to say that people do say that it could be related. And if I was a lawyer, this is when I would shout out, objection, this is hearsay.
Then the unseen interviewer asked Lieutenant Estes if anyone could possibly believe in witchcraft in this day and age. This is the space age. So how would he explain this?
And then Esty replies that it doesn't matter if he or the narrator or any of us think that it's real. What's important is that the people practicing believe it's real. And there's nothing anyone can say to change their minds.
And then the narrator rhetorically asks, witchcraft in the United States? Absurd. Or is it?
Well, they don't answer that question right away because
it's rhetorical.
They don't present any evidence either way for the United States, because now we're going to England, where we find ourselves outside a castle in Clockkill, Bedford, England, which apparently belongs to a Marion McLaughlin, a known witch, they say without evidence.
The narrator tells us that Marion has agreed to allow them to film a black mass in progress and only asks that they not interfere with the ceremony. So they put the camera in the back corner of the building, but still managed to get some pretty marvelous coverage from that one corner.
Marion does her black candle mass with invocations to Pan, topless. And that's when we start to zoom in when there are naked breasts to be seen.
So after an invocation of Pan, the ritual begins with the traditional kiss of the beast. And the topless women all line up and kiss a guy in a goat mask.
Our narrator tells us that they're doing this in an abandoned church. The rituals don't have to be presented there, but they like it because it adds a bit of spice to the proceedings, whatever that means.
As the narrator likes to tell us, these rituals work their best if they're presenting a denouncement of God in the process.
And what could be more sacrilegious than doing it in the confines of a church?
So then they lay the naked body of the priestess on the floor to be used as the altar, since that would be pretty sacrilegious too.
It looks like they toss the host and the wine on her naked body, but I can't really see much of what's going on here.
The narrator says that the mass is performed backwards. So yeah, that's what they're doing. They're doing everything backwards just to offend God.
Well, you'd think that backwards would be them taking the host and the drinking the wine and then like barfing it up or something. That's reverse.
Yeah, that's how I would do it too. Then the narrator tells us that what we're seeing is really typical throughout England. Who knew?
Presented without evidence. The priestess dares God to come and get her. And then the narrator tells us that in good conscience, they're going to spare us the sight of all the naked acolytes copulating with the goat man. We missed out, I guess. This movie was rated X, but they don't show us that. And now we get some more history. In the 13th century, as every school kid knows, witches rode broomsticks, brewed cauldrons of potions made with newborn babies, but now they preach on the public square.
Yep, we meet Eleanor Bone, who speaks at Speaker's Corner, Hyde Park, London, England, and she sits on the corner on Sundays and preaches her word to a bunch of angry people.
She publicly denounces God and pumps up Satan. And although she is confronted with the angry populace, the narrator tells us that every week she gets a few new converts. So I guess it's worth her time and effort.
And appears to have some financial reward too. She's considered a professional witch, and she's been able to, as the narrator tells us, handsomely supplement her husband's income by charging money for her services.
And what are her services, I wonder?
Well, fortunately for us, the film tells us next.
Because we cut away to Eleanor's coven, where they're performing a ritual.
She's accepted money to remove a curse. A woman's husband has been ill for some time, and medication has totally failed the patient. And the narrator tells us that the authorized demonic manual requires celebrants to strip naked while casting or exercising.
Why do I feel like the producers are the ones that are requiring everyone to be naked for these?
No, it's so that their body can emanate more satanic power. That's what they say.
I know that's what they say. Just seems kind of silly.
Then he says that two of the women prefer not to be photographed, so even though they're nude on camera, their faces are scratched out on the film.
And then, still new, they do a dance and a chant and call for help. And apparently it works. We find out right away that the husband is now better. I really feel like the efficacy of this would have to be tested over time, but we're going to move on.
We're back in California with Lieutenant David Estes again, and the unseen questioner.
I bet this is Lee Frost, the director.
He says, okay, he talks about these ceremonies, drinking of blood and slaughter of animals, but are there even worse things that people are doing? Lieutenant Estes doesn't know. He says it's possible. And he repeats what he said earlier about the kids believing in this. So to them, it's real.
Thanks, Lieutenant Estes. And now we're going to go to Italy, where a woman, Giuseppina Granella of Salata, Italy, performs a daily rite where she is infused with the soul of her dead nephew, Alberto, and she speaks to a standing room only crowd in his voice so she can talk to family members who also had someone die in a car accident like Alberto did.
Apparently this village is a really unsafe place to drive because everybody has somebody who died in a car accident.
There's hundreds of people there. Each one of them is holding up an item of clothing or something else belonging to the deceased so that Alberto can recognize which dead soul he has to report on. And her prophesizing is so accurate that many call her a witch. I believe that that's probably not true, but they are saying that just to tie this segment in with the others.
Sounds to me like she's more of a medium, maybe?
Yeah, psychic.
Then the camera pans over the chapel, which is plastered with pictures of car crash victims.
Ceiling to floor, side to side, this must be the most dangerous place to be a pedestrian in all of Europe.
The narrator says that they serve as a grisly reminder of the potential dangers of the highway, to say nothing of the popularity in Salata of communicating with the dead. And then he says that the mass hysteria seen in Salada, he calls it mass hysteria, is duplicated on this Friday night in a warehouse in Lucha, Louisiana. Lucha is located halfway between New Orleans and the capital city of Baton Rouge. And here we get to witness a voodoo ceremony.
So there's a little confusion on my part here where there was a snake and there's a zombie, but in fact, the snake is the zombie. I don't think it's a zombie in the sense that we use it in the modern day, Walking Dead, etc. This is just
well, even in voodoo, it's not that.
No,
but the snake is a representation of the zombie for this ritual.
We are told this is a hidden camera, but there is one person who spots the camera and smiles at it. This is our paid informant who has granted them access, I guess, to this never-before-seen initiation ceremony.
Allegedly.
He does give a wink to the camera, though, so that's telling.
Well, he obviously knew about it, but it doesn't mean that he was their paid informant. This whole thing could have been staged, and they said, well, we got to make this footage work somehow.
We're told that this is the voodoo of today. It's for rich and poor people, young and old. Perhaps there's even a college man or two on the premises.
And on this night, to give their vows to Damballa are 3 new initiates, 2 women and 1 man. There's a voodoo king and a voodoo queen in this ceremony, and the voodoo queen dances a dance, quote, intended to bring the mood of the worshippers to near hysteria, unquote.
Seems to work. As the drum beat picks up, the zombie is brought in to meet everyone. There's more screaming and frenzied dancing. And then the zombie gets put in a cage, and the queen collapses and is placed on the altar, which is the snake cage, I think, or zombie cage.
And then the king stops the prayer, which is the sign for the next phase of the ritual, the animal sacrifice. Nudity is required once again.
That's the buy-in to this movie, I think.
So the spirit of the Damballa can pierce their flesh. So the king draws a black circle in the ground with the burnt end of a stick. Everybody drinks blood to prove their devotion, and the initiates eat meat.
And then everybody dances. It's sort of like Catholicism, but sexier and with more drugs.
Same amount of nudity, though.
I haven't been to Mass in a while. I wrote that this does not look like a hidden camera to me.
This one had a lot of footage, too. Yeah, a lot of coverage.
Where you think a hidden camera is just locked down someplace, but we're getting a lot of different cuts here. And then they put a voodoo doll in with the zombie for reasons that, well, if they're explained, I didn't write them down.
The narrator didn't know for sure either, but he said it's likely the image of someone who's being hexed.
Well, that's usually what they're for, right? So pretty good guess on his part, I'd say.
Plus, this is probably the most evil thing he can come up with, and this is an evil satanic ritual, this voodoo stuff.
I don't think that's the case. Don't quote me, but a lot of the things I think the narrator's supposing are unsupported by evidence. Now we're going to leave the swamps of Louisiana to go to Grosvenor Square, London. There we're going to dine with Alexander Sanders, real estate broker, and his fiancée, Maxine Harrington.
And tonight they're going to get married, according to the rites of the occult. They have guests coming from all over the place. There's a salesman, a chemist assistant, and a diabolical-looking banker.
And this time the camera is not hidden. This couple and their middle-class friends don't give a shit if you know how much they love Satan.
Once again, a circle is drawn into the floor, and Alexander is no longer Alexander, but has become a representation of Satan himself. So it's Satan, not Alexander, who kisses the points of sensuality of the bride-to-be. That's directly from their narration.
The bride is bound to Satan and or Dionysus, and then to her husband.
Her hand is sliced with a dagger, and this represents her binding with Satan for the rest of her life.
Maybe she should have put an upside-down cross brand on her chest.
Her primary interest and allegiance will be first to Satan, and then secondly to her husband.
I thought her husband was Satan.
Then the dagger that still has Maxine's blood on it is dipped in a chalice of wine, and everyone partakes, linking them to Dionysus, the god of ecstatic intoxication.
And then the bride slips out of her dress and steps into the magic circle and fornicates with Satan. Now, is that her husband?
No, this is still Satan.
But it's the body of her husband?
It's her husband, but he represents, I don't know. It's not my religion, so I can't really say, but it's not her husband at the moment. It is, but it's Satan.
Maybe I just misunderstood.
That's okay. It's not your religion, is it?
Wouldn't you like to know? And now I guess another woman wants to join this cult?
Yeah, they were lucky enough to get a twofer on this night that they had the cameras there.
And of course, her initiation involves the requisite nudity and fornicating.
And they interview her after the fact, and she's American.
Wow.
She was asked why would someone like herself want to join a cult like this? And she says, well, I think perhaps a feeling of depression for the way things are going today. So she was depressed, so she joined a cult. I thought that was really appropriate.
Well, that's how it goes. She thinks Satanism fulfills her in a way that Christianity, with its bombs and wars, simply cannot. And then it's time for her to get laid in the magic circle. I don't know, I can kind of understand that depression thing for sure. I just don't know that cults are the answer.
Next, the narrator tells us that there were 2 instances when filming this documentary when their cameras were not allowed to film what was going on, so they had to purchase footage.
Yeah, some grainy 8mm home movies that they try to blow up to 35mm. This is a Brazilian religious practice, and at first we just see some lovely people out on the beach dancing. Seems like a good time. At first.
It's a ceremony meant to protect the people from the serpent of death and subsequent imprisonment in purgatory. So they're not just having a good time. There is a reason for this.
I know. But it doesn't become sinister until midway through. And our narrator tells us, because there's no audio to this, so we're relying entirely on his interpretation of what's happening here, that some young women who he says are prostitutes need to be punished for the sins of the village. They have to beat their own breasts against the scorching hot rocks of the earth.
And they have to do this all day.
But oddly, they're not nude.
And the narrator tells us that local authorities shut an eye in the interest of discouraging prostitution.
Where are the male customers? Why aren't they being similarly scourged?
I think you know the answer to that.
Of course I do.
This goes on throughout the day, and then at night, enough prayer has been said that these women can stop beating themselves against the rocks, but it's not over for them quite yet. They have to stand naked in the cold river.
To further wash away their sins, I guess.
When the sun rises, they will be brought ashore, and they will have found new purity.
Love the symbolism here. And now it's time for Carnival. There's costumes, music, dancing.
And we're in Rio.
And now we're at another ceremony whose name we're just guessing at here, but we think he said Respago. We're at a new queen's coronation. She's a teenage girl taking over for her dead mom, who was the old queen in this tribe.
Her name is Jo, and she is allegedly possessed by a spirit of a saint, so she is set to be the new queen.
Prior to this ritual, she was starved, her head was shaved, and she was pumped full of stimulants.
They show the shaving of her head, and they're really rough about it. Her scalp is bleeding, and it didn't look like a pleasant experience.
For this ritual, she's wearing 3 dresses, and she sheds them one at a time to symbolize turning from child to adolescent to adult woman. And we're told that all believers in the country celebrate her coronation.
And as she takes her place as Queen of the Witches of Rio, she and her husband, should she marry, and all of her children will be financially supported by offerings from the many witchcraft cults throughout the city.
And now we have a feast because the spirits are about and they must be fed. And then people get drunk and stoned and dance and basically forget what they're doing there.
And everybody eats better than they will the rest of the year.
Take some of that home in a Tupperware.
And then we go elsewhere in Brazil, supposedly on the same night, and we see some white witchcraft in action. Its intention is to counterbalance all the black witchcraft that goes on in the area.
But what we see is more mind-altering drugs being administered and a lot of thrashing and chanting.
Yeah, but they all wear white to signify their purity. There are some new initiates this night, and they are given coconut milk to drink. It's spiked with something, but the leader, Madre Hasando, is the only one who knows what's in it. And then we're whisked off to Stockholm, Sweden, where a group of faith healers allegedly cures people of their illnesses. They say that it's Satan within the body that is making them sick. So it's basically an exorcism.
Along with a full body baptism, so they get dunked in the water to chase away the demons.
We meet a little girl who is the victim of a heart disease and has required constant medical care. But from this moment on, she's going to put her faith in this religion, and we all wish her the best.
Oh, no. Oh, poor kid.
And then the narrator tells us the story of a 13-year-old boy who died a few years ago from a lack of insulin.
Don't do this, people.
And so when leaders of this congregation were informed of the boy's death, they just said that they didn't pray hard enough.
Of course. And now we see another 8mm film, this one shot in Bali. This ceremony involves a male witch who's walking around scaring the women. So a bunch of men play act fighting the priest and each other in a ritual mimicking their fight against the devil.
The men attack him with their knives, but it doesn't penetrate because he's pure evil. And this is all a reenactment. It's like a folk dance. It's part of ceremony, and it's not like this is really happening.
And again, we have to rely on the narrator. You can interpret it the way he says, or we can interpret it our own way, but we don't know for sure.
But sometimes what the narrator says is pretty funny. Like in this instance, when he says, well, they couldn't penetrate his skin, so they gave up and started fighting amongst themselves.
Does that sound like our modern society or what?
Now we're back in the United States, specifically San Francisco, where we meet one Anton LaVey.
He's the celebrity get for this movie.
He is the high priest of Satan.
And he dresses accordingly with a horned hood, and he's got the goatee, too.
On this day, there's a couple there to get married in the eyes of Satan.
Anton LaVey's wife, Diane, is there as well.
So they perform this ceremony, and it's much like the ones we've seen before, where there's a naked woman on the altar, the participants all stripped down.
Drugs are involved.
Drugs are involved, and the main difference here is that everybody looks incredibly bored.
Yes, we're told a trio of bosomy acolytes watches the proceedings, but everyone looks like they're kind of waiting for the clock to run out on this so they can go home.
And the reason for this, we're told, is that they often do this ceremony up to 3 times a day, 7 days a week.
It's a living.
And there's a fee involved, so this is their job.
If you brought your cameras to me doing my job, you'd probably see me looking a little dazed as well. And now we're back with the lone authority figure in the movie, Lieutenant David Estes. He says that the drugs involved with black magic and witchcraft have led to some young people being committed to mental institutions. A lot of those ceremonial chalices are filled with wine laced with LSD, and that's what's causing this. And then he makes the extraordinary claim that these young people are then corrupting their own parents into these cults. Now the parents are doing drugs and worshiping black magic.
And SD believes that this is destroying all moral fiber in the United States. And he's concerned that the country is reverting back to the Dark Ages.
Our narrator tells us that Lieutenant Estes is not a witch hunter. He's just a man concerned with today's youth and society.
And he's also anti-drugs.
Shocking. Police officers anti-drugs? They could only find the one.
And speaking of today's youth, we're now in Devil's Canyon, California, where we see a hippie cult do their thing.
Again, this is a hidden camera. I don't know, it seems like it's positioned in the next canyon because we're not very close. We can't hear very much.
And the narrator does apologize for that.
They could get no closer without being caught. Well, we're witnessing a bunch of hippies sitting around a bonfire at first, and someone walks around passing out something that our narrator tells us is probably LSD. And in this case, he's probably right. I mean, it's probably not chocolate.
And then the person the narrator says is the head of this cult enters, the witch, wearing a red hat, and there are 3 new initiates being brought to the group.
It's weird how all these ceremonies are initiation ceremonies, or maybe every ceremony is an initiation ceremony. Otherwise, they wouldn't have one.
So a circle is made on the ground, because that's what you do, this one with white powder. A bell is rung 9 times, and a red candle is lit.
Now, everything the narrator tells us is pure speculation because what's happening, you can't really see it. You can't hear much of anything. There's music playing. I guess I have a record player. And there's some low mumbling, but we don't really hear anything being said.
No, and it looks to me like just hippies hanging out and doing their thing. It doesn't look satanic or witchcrafty or anything like that to me.
Well, they do pass around a chalice, and everybody drinks, and when it spills down their naked chests, it does look bloody. I'll give him that. And then they're forced to eat something, which it could be anything. You said cat guts when we were watching it.
Well, tennis rackets.
All right. Something stringy and wet. Could be just plain old meat chopped up into strips.
And then the newbies all write something on a piece of paper. The narrator supposes it's probably their own name, and it's thrown into the fire, and this represents
the death of their former selves. And then the narrator says he finds it curious that the initiates are sexually assaulted to complete the ceremony. We don't know that it's assault, though. Everyone has sex at the end of all these ceremonies. And there's naked dancing.
And then, apropos of nothing, we are taken to the Spahn Movie Ranch, which is most famous today because a man named Charles Manson and his family resided there.
It's just 2.5 miles away from where they were filming that ritual.
And the narrator says that though these were hippies, there seems to be no connection between the witchcraft ceremony that we just saw and the Manson family cult.
So why bring it up? Well, I'll tell you why. It's so that we might heed Lieutenant Estes' warning about preventing our society from plummeting back into the dark ages of human sacrifice or whatever.
Yep, human sacrifice shall always remain our greatest danger.
I don't know that that's true, but that is the end.
You're listening to the American International Podcast, where we're discussing Witchcraft 70 from 1970.
In January of 1970, columnist Gerald Nachman reviewed AIP's recently released annual report for 1969, where it announced that Witchcraft 70, among other projects, would begin filming that year, which we assume was 1969.
The Trans-American Press Book said the Witchcraft 70 cameras uncovered sensual and terrifying occult practices from Bali to New Orleans and California. The film provides evidence from police files linking witchcraft today with excessive drug abuse and murder.
Sure it does. Witchcraft 70 was released in the United States in August of 1970, first playing in Chicago. The film was rated X at first, and paired with movies like Macabro, The Devil's Bride, and Cult of the Damned, which was a new title given to Angel, Angel, Down We Go.
Witchcraft 70 was also released as The Satanists in the UK. It was a re-edited version of an Italian film released in 1969 called Angeli Bianchi, Angeli Neri, translated White Angel, Black Angel, which was mostly shot in Brazil. The US version of Witchcraft 70, narrated by Edmund Purdom, has a different music score and includes additional scenes photographed and directed by Lee Frost under the name R.L. Frost, and several scenes were dubbed into English.
One exploitation tip offered to theater owners was to have attractive young ladies dressed in professional uniforms and outfits, think nurse, teacher, secretary, and have them go about town passing out flyers that read, "During the day I'm a nurse," for example, "but come see what I do at night," and advertise where the movie's playing.
At Zero Theater in Salt Lake City, Utah, patrons were offered a free skull and talisman to ward off the evils of Witchcraft 70 in newspaper ads for the film.
Wow, I wish I could have got one of those.
Taglines for Witchcraft 70 include, "The weird world of witchcraft exposed."
A wild, weird world of bizarre practices and savage pleasures actually filmed as they exist today in the cities and suburbs of your civilization.
The shocking truth about witchcraft as it exists today in our cities and suburbs.
Exposed through the eye of the hidden camera.
From penthouses and country estates of the jet set to hippie communities and the dark alleys of the asphalt jungles, the demonic throb of ritual drums, bizarre chants of the Necronomicon evoke a modern world of unspeakable cults, strange rituals, and exotic rites.
See the actual human sacrifice and blood-stained altar of Baal, weird demonic rites of the cult of Kali, erotic prayers to the goddess of the cloven hoof, macabre orgies of a secret sect of evil. The Church of Satan celebrates its infamous Black Mass, occult manifestations in the Coven of the Dead, voodoo worshippers and the bizarre price they pay, and the sensual ecstasies of hippie families.
Box Office Magazine wrote in their review, Witchcraft 70 contains enough good material to be acceptable in the general market. The erotic ingredients can also be called upon to sell it as a sexploitation item. Most of the rites begin with a feeling of being staged for the cameras, but the participants prove so uninhibited that it hardly matters. Some Rio Carnival scenes, also used in Venus and Furs, suggest the budget wasn't very high.
Brown Allen Flynn of the Memphis Press Scimitar wrote in their review, for a real trick or treat this Halloween, you might want to take in Witchcraft 70. For the weak of mind and strong of stomach, it may be a treat, but for others, it's a sure enough trick. The hidden cameraman got very good cooperation from his unsuspecting crew of performers. They very obligingly sit in a semicircle all facing the camera, and if the narrator didn't tell you differently, you'd swear the head witch maneuvers himself into his best camera angle.
Joe Beltacchi of the Philadelphia Daily News wrote in his review, a series of weirdly staged sexually oriented rituals make up the bulk of Witchcraft 70, a depraved film that offers rock-bottom entertainment. An assortment of simulated witchcraft practices from different areas of the world are self-consciously staged. The movie literally crawls with self-proclaimed witches and warlocks who drink blood, practice sex, and turn on. Periodically, the camera focuses on a shifty-looking patrolman who gives his not-too-expert viewpoints on the macabre.
Jeff Miller in the Houston Chronicle wrote, Witchcraft 70 is the latest for the sickies. It's a pallid documentary in the style of Mondo Cane, most of it pathetically faked.
William Collins in the Philadelphia Inquirer called Witchcraft 70 excruciatingly phony and said, despite some scenes being shot on the Spahn movie ranch, the movie has nothing to do with either Manson or the ranch, but with considerably more boring manifestations of occult nonsense, shown with the elaborate pretense of looking into forbidden things. About the alleged hidden cameras, he wrote, it is all the more remarkable that none of these secret revelers ever gets in the camera's way.
George Anderson in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette wrote, Witchcraft 70 is a repulsive little head-turner, a pseudo-documentary in the grisly tradition of Mondo Cane. Since it was revealed that one or two sections in Mondo Cane were faked, the successors have been increasingly suspect. Witchcraft 70 is no exception. The sole authority you can find to trot out before the cameras is a police lieutenant from a small town near San Francisco. He concluded by saying, with an unctuously hypocritical narration, several scenes seem even worse than exploitation. Overall, the film's ugliness is exceeded only by its boredom.
So Cheryl, when looking at Witchcraft 70, though the narrator told us he wouldn't, he kind of took the view that all this witchcraft stuff is evil. I don't know how you felt about it. Are you ready to convert?
I wonder that this was even witchcraft that he's talking about.
It's not. Most of this isn't.
This is cult behavior and perhaps satanic cult behavior, or people who that's what they believe, whether it's true or not. Just like our expert said, doesn't matter what we believe, it matters what they think they believe. But witchcraft to me is more like Wiccan rituals where you're using nature to manifest things in your own life and perhaps even manifest things for other people. But witchcraft isn't drinking blood and chanting to Pan.
Yeah, and I think that's a big problem with this movie is that it's creating this image of witchcraft that isn't truly accurate to what witchcraft actually is, and it's building on pre-existing notions.
Well, even the pre-existing notions of witchcraft are potions and spells and broomsticks and black hats. And this is not any of that. This isn't even like the Witchcraft for Dummies version of witchcraft.
Yeah, it's taking a pretty broad definition of witchcraft because these hippies are witches, according to Edmund Purdom.
The narrator, yeah. When I found out the movie was called The Satanists in the UK, I wonder why they didn't call it that here, because it makes a lot more sense to call it that. Don't involve witchcraft in this because nobody's doing anything remotely witchy.
Well, I think it's just looking at it from a religious standpoint, particularly a Christian standpoint, where anything that's not Christian is evil. So it was probably easier to sell that way.
I'm sure it was. A movie called The Satanists is going to scare off a lot of the audience.
Exactly. I thought it was a little strange to see this movie coming out from AIP or their Trans-American arm because they didn't want to sully their own name with a trashy movie like this. But we've seen so many films from AIP that just celebrated the counterculture. And to see this one that just condemned it, these people are Satanists, it was just whiplash-inducing.
Well, wasn't this 4 to 6 years after Taboos of the World was released? Because that's what this movie reminds me of, is Taboos of the World.
Well, yeah, it's another Mondo documentary.
Where we're looking at strange doings in non-traditional cultures, and we're not making fun of them to the point that that movie did, Taboos of the World. Here, I think they're trying to induce a little satanic panic.
Oh, a little?
I would say more if they were actually good at their job, but they're not.
I remember the satanic panic of the 80s, and there were stories going around, oh, somebody found a cat's skull in that house or whatever, and here's stories like that.
Dead cats hanging in trees and trying to get children to regurgitate some made-up stories about being in ritual practices. And yeah, it was a whole big thing. It ruined a lot of lives in the 80s. Here, I think this is sort of a reflex response to cults like the Manson family cult. I mean, that was 1969, and that was incredibly shocking. But it doesn't mean that it was widespread, that this is a thing that's happening all over the country.
Watching this so-called documentary kind of felt to me like watching Fox News, where they're showing something and saying, this is the worst that could possibly be, and here's why.
They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs.
Exactly.
Literally, it's the same playbook. Yeah, the fact that they could come up with but one authority figure to bring us the news that this is a big problem.
And it was Lieutenant Estes of all people.
And even he was like, well, you can't really say that they're connected, but people do talk. Nobody has a shred of evidence for anything in this movie. It's sensationalism. I hope nobody took it seriously. It doesn't sound like the reviewers did.
I don't think the reviewers did, but I imagine that there were people who got all up in arms that this was happening anywhere in the world.
Yeah, small towns, big cities.
We didn't have any notes. Did the Catholic League have anything to say about this one?
I don't think they even reviewed X-rated movies, to be honest, because I think those speak for themselves. I bet a lot of them went to see it, though.
Yeah, because some people just aren't happy unless they're angry.
And this does feed into that a bit.
And it made me angry, but for the opposite reasons, because they were treating these religions, okay, they may be a little different than what I'm used to, but...
Is that wrong?
They talk about murder in the reviews, but I don't think there was any human sacrifice in this. People were slicing themselves as part of a ritual, but it wasn't forced on them. They were doing it willingly, so I don't think that's an issue.
And tarnishing the voodoo ceremonies as evil, along with all this other stuff.
Despite the narrator saying he's not going to do that.
Right. You be the judge. But I think it's all tinged with, can you believe this horrible nightmare stuff is happening?
And it all stems from LSD.
Yeah. I'm not saying drugs are good, but I don't think that they're going to plunge us back into the dark ages either. I think that drugs are a symptom and not the actual problem. They want to cure society's ills. I have a laundry list of where we can start, but it doesn't start with banning drugs.
I think for some people, this might have worked as a kind of a commercial for some of these religions, because when I went to church, there was never any nudity. But as I said, I wasn't raised Catholic, so that's probably why.
That was the evening mass. If you went to the morning mass, you wouldn't have seen that.
I meant after mass.
Well, no, that was the mass. Like you said, how would you know? You got to go to those basement masses in the rectory with the guitars. That's where the nudity happens.
I don't doubt that. Did you see anything here that played to you as obviously faked?
Well, I think when we see the camera moving around in a place where we're told it's supposed to be hidden, that to me screams fake. When we know that you can't get all those different angles from one camera, or they're cutting back and forth between different angles. We know that they're actually invited the cameras in for a couple of these segments, so those can't be fake.
Like the 2 wedding ceremonies.
Yeah.
We have actual people, actual known people performing the ceremonies.
The fact that they could do so openly kind of says this wasn't really a big secret or a big problem, too. I mean, Anton LaVey is sort of the celebrity Satanist, but he's not like he's on the lam or he's not in custody anywhere. They're not going to arrest him.
Yeah. And again, that points to the fact that nobody's being sacrificed here, because he probably would be.
Yeah, they're just kind of weird. They're not doing anything flagrantly violating the law.
No, in the United States, at least as of this date in 2026, freedom of religion is still a thing.
Well, but for now, yeah, you're right. There are millions of different religious practices, and nobody can say that they're part of the right religion.
The thing is that they're all weird, even yours. You don't realize it because you've been doing it all your life, but it's weird.
Yes, to an observer from another religion, another culture, everything looks weird, but it's totally normal for them. So who are we to judge? But yeah, this is a very silly movie.
I didn't find it silly. It kind of angered me in the way it presented everything.
Yes, because it should have been a silly movie. And instead, they're trying to make this mortal judgment on society with zero evidence that this is affecting society at large.
What this is propaganda.
I agree. But what was their goal? When it's released as an X-rated movie, you're not going to get as many views as if you package it like a documentary.
Well, these Mondo movies, in a lot of ways, were just created for a certain type of audience. People aren't just going to see these. They're going because they get to see breasts on film, which isn't too common yet in 1970.
Because it's not just actresses. It's women from everyday life.
Allegedly.
But I don't think they're all actresses. I think that even if they were hired, they're just hired from off the street. They don't have SAG cards.
Oh, it's obviously not union, no. I don't know. I usually enjoy the Mondo movies, but this one I didn't really care for that much. And I think it was just because it was preachy.
Yeah, what's your audience here? Is your audience people who love exploitation, who love X-rated movies? Or is your audience a bunch of prudes who want to feel morally superior? Because you don't make X-rated movies for them. So I think there's a real audience mismatch.
Yeah, and I think this one was made just to scare people because it's making a big deal of things that really aren't a big deal and telling you this is bad and something has to be done about it.
But you don't make that kind of movie and rate it X and sell it to people who want to see boobs.
Well, you have to consider this is an Italian movie, so who knows what its ultimate agenda was. By the time it came to America, it was re-edited. The scenes with Lieutenant Estes were added.
Mm-hmm.
It was redubbed.
They threw in the Spawn Ranch stuff for no reason, just to scare people.
They used that as a blurb, didn't they? So
yeah,
they had to put that in there because people were still up in arms. This was still recent news, and it probably got at least a few people in the theater wanting to know more about what happened because it's really difficult for the average person to understand what was going on in the minds of that cult.
Or any cult, really.
Well, this was the one that was in the news at the time, so that's why I'm using it as an example.
And I think that was just a really cheap bait and switch on their part.
Well, it's not like AIP isn't known for that.
No, you're right.
It's kind of their MO. Okay, Cheryl, so how are we going to rate the documentary Witchcraft 70 using our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic?
I think I agree with just about every critic whose movie reviews we just read off that this was not a good movie. It's cheap looking, it's cheaply presented. They're aiming for a certain audience with an X rating and all this nudity, but they completely go against that with this narration that's talking about moral decay and returning our society to the Dark Ages. So I just don't understand why they did that. It shreds the message that they're trying to give. But then again, I don't know, maybe they are appealing to a certain kind of people who want to pretend to be moral, but are really perverted and can't admit it to themselves. I don't know. But at any rate, there's no way that this is for a large audience. This is for a very niche group. And I am not in that niche group. So to me, this is a pathetic movie. It's pathetic in intent and execution. I hope I never have to see it again. What do you think?
I think a lot of the problem with this movie is just its attitude. When it comes out condemning what it's talking about from the very beginning, even though it's just that it's not, it didn't present anything positive. Even the one segment they had with the white magic, they kind of just gloss over and say, oh, this is here too. They don't say it's good. They just say it's here. So everything is bad if it's not Christian, I guess. They don't specifically say that, but that's kind of the feeling I get watching it. And it didn't help that the print that we had is just so bad. Even if I was just in it for the boobs, you don't really get to see much. It's so dark.
Grainy.
So I'm going to give this one a P as well. And I'm also okay with never seeing it again.
They did have something when the American woman in London was talking about how depressing today's society was. If they had seized on that and sort of explored why people might actually turn to a cult, even a satanic kind of cult, to escape that, they could have had an interesting movie, but then it wouldn't be an X-rated movie with tons of nudity.
But it would have been a much better documentary.
Exactly. But we can see what their priorities were for this movie. So yeah, they just wanted to make a dirty movie and for some reason chose to throw in a bunch of moralizing.
Well, Catholicism is pretty big in Italy, so I guess you can understand them taking that viewpoint.
Yeah, but Catholicism is just one of many, many religions here in the United States, and you can't really claim a uniform religion here, at least for now. Now, there's no need to sacrifice anything to join the American International Podcast cult. Just go to our website, aippod.com. There you'll find our back catalog of over 150 episodes dedicated to American International Pictures. We have a contact form, so please communicate with us from the beyond or wherever you are. Maybe you can help us find one of the movies on our missing list, or maybe you have a comment or a request. We love both. While you're there, check out the trailers, posters, lobby cards, and more from films that we've covered and find out where to see them for yourself. We also have an ever-expanding database of information about AIP films. And check out our store. Any and all purchases keep the podcast rolling on. All that and more can be found at aippod.com.
Well, that's our take on Witchcraft 70, and if you're still listening after all that, we do appreciate it. And we promise we'll be back next week to share something with a little more plot. This has been the American International Podcast with Jeff Markin
and Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.